Welcome to the Starting Well podcast. Whether you are a new pastor or you're beginning to serve in a new church, this podcast is designed to help you start well. I'm your host, Jason Lowe, and I serve as a regional consultant with the Kentucky Baptist Convention. And I am so glad that you've joined us for this episode. Let's get started. Well, the last time we were together, I told you that I loved baseball. The fact of the matter is I love all sports, and I'm a huge University of Kentucky basketball fan. Now, don't hold that against me if you cheer for another team. That's okay, but I am a huge Kentucky fan and been very excited this past season that just concluded with Mark Pope as our new head basketball coach. And it's been an exciting year. We made it to the Sweet 16. I hope we can make it further in later seasons, but I'm just so excited for our basketball hopes and dreams for the future. But one of the things I noticed with this team, and really it's true for a lot of sports teams, is that a slow start can be absolutely detrimental to the outcome of that game. The Cats fell behind many times this season. Sometimes they came back, but most of the time the deficit was just too much to overcome. Whenever that happens, whenever a sports team gets behind early, it's such an uphill battle to get back in the game. It requires intense effort. It requires focus. It requires just a lot of work just to get back competitive, to get back in that game. And most of the time, the deficit is just too much to overcome. And they're always fighting. They're always trying to get back. But the reality is they end up losing those games a lot of times. And so that's why it's critical to start well. That is true with the University of Kentucky basketball program. That is true with my Cincinnati Bengals in football. That is true for the Cincinnati Reds. That is true for every sports team, whatever team you like as well. It's true that you must start well. It's also true not only in sports, but also in pastoring a church. And so on this episode, we're going to be talking about the 4 foundational principles for starting well. These are principles that I have learned over the years through observation, through experience, but also talking with a lot of other church consultants on the Kentucky Baptist Convention staff, associational leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention, a lot of different experts that have spoken into my life to help me really learn these 4 foundational principles that I want to share with you today. By the way, you're going to hear these principles over and over again in further episodes because this is so important. This is absolutely foundational for a new pastor to get started on the right foot. Now, these priorities certainly do not guarantee that you as a pastor won't face difficulties, that you won't face challenges, or even unnecessary conflict. But I can promise you that failing to focus on these priorities will nearly guarantee that difficult days are in your future. That those early days of ministry, that honeymoon phase, is going to end very quickly if you don't focus on these 4 foundational principles. And so let's dive right in. Let's talk about them. Number 1, if you want to start well in your ministry, whether you're a new pastor or beginning in a new church, you must begin by loving well. Okay? You must love well. Jesus said in John chapter 13, verse 35, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." Jesus makes it very clear that his disciples will be known for the love that they have for one another. Now, this statement certainly applies to every Christian. Whether you're a pastor or not, we are called to love one another. But it most certainly should be true for those who are called to pastor God's people. And let's be honest, for some of you, this one's easy because you're a people person. You love being around people. You love getting to know them. You love hearing their story. You thrive in building relationships with people. I once had a pastor who fit this description. He truly loved people, and it showed. Anytime you were around him, it didn't take long. He's asking about how you're doing. He's asking about your family. He's asking about what God's doing in your life. He's asking all these questions, and it was genuine. He truly loved people. And anytime I was around him, I was so encouraged. I just felt better no matter what was going on in my life, what was going on that particular day. Whenever I was around my pastor, I could tell that he truly loved me. Now, all these years later, as I've served as a pastor now for years and now serve as a church consultant, I still call him from time to time, and he still calls me. And it's just such an encouragement to spend some time with him on the phone because he is such an encourager. He still loves me all these years later. Now, that might describe you. You might be a people person, and loving well is just like breathing for you. But for others, let's be honest, this is tough. Because you may be like me, you may be more task-oriented than people-oriented. It's not that you dislike people, it's just that God has wired you more to focus on the task at hand. Now, by the way, if you do dislike people, you probably need to find another way to serve the Lord other than pastoral ministry. This is probably not the best place for you to serve in God's church. But if you are task-oriented and you do love people, but sometimes you have a difficulty showing it, you might get so focused on making a change in your church or trying to turn your plateaued or declining church around, or maybe you're just so focused on planning the next event in your church that you lose sight of your primary calling. And that calling is to shepherd the flock of God among you. Now, it's okay if you want to lead the church to get out of their comfort zones, to start new ministries, or adopt a new mission statement. Nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, you're going to be doing that as you lead the flock forward. But you will only effectively lead them to do those things if you first take the time to love them well. You need to get to know the flock and you need to build those relationships, but you also need to let them get to know you, those flaws and all. None of us are perfect. And to try to put on a facade for our church members to think that we're perfect, it just isn't helpful. And so you need to build those relationships. You need to be transparent with your people. You don't want to air all of your dirty laundry, but you certainly want to let them know that you are not perfect. And as you do so, you will build those relationships and you will eventually gain their trust and they will start to follow your leadership. But you see, that doesn't happen on day one. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes consistency. And it takes love. When I was in seminary, I was a member of a church, and I loved that church. It was a dear church to me. I still have very fond memories of that church. And I remember one time in particular that the pastor was not going to be there, and so he was talking to the chairman of the deacons of that church, talking about who was going to fill the pulpit. And the deacon chairman offered my name and said, "Why don't you just get Jason to fill in for you if you're not going to be here?" And the pastor, although he loves me and certainly allowed me to preach in his pulpit many times, that particular time he said, I don't want to just get another seminary student to do it. I'd like to get somebody else to do it. And the deacon chairman said these words, and I heard them later. He said, "But Jason doesn't feel like a seminary student. He feels like one of us." And I got to tell you, that all these years later still touches my heart to know that this deacon chairman knew that I loved him. I wasn't going to be there forever. I was a seminary student, but I had developed some relationships there, and he felt like I was not just a seminary student who was there for a short time, and then would move on to a ministry somewhere. But he truly felt like I was part of that church and that I loved him. Now, I haven't always loved well, but that was one time I got it right. And I truly loved those dear people, and they loved me, as you could tell from this comment. But in future episodes, we'll talk more about specific ways to love well. But right now, just understand that if you want to start well in your ministry as a new pastor or beginning to serve in a new church, it begins with your commitment to love your people well. So that's number one. Number two, not only do you need to love your people well, you also need to learn well. Now, unless you are a church planter, you're probably pastoring a church that's been around for a little while, maybe 10 years, 20 years, or it could be like my home church, which has been around for 120 years. And so because your church has been around for a while, you're not its first pastor, and you probably won't be its last. There have been others who have preceded you, those that have sowed the seed, those that have watered the seed, and those that have reaped a harvest in the past. And there will be those after you who build upon the ministry that you have at this church. So you are part of a long line of pastors that have faithfully shepherded the flock in your local church for this particular season. So recognize that you're not the church's first pastor, and you probably won't be its last. That means that it has a history. That means that it has its own unique culture. It has a particular way of doing things long before you arrived. It has a particular way that they go about their business meetings and who runs those meetings and all of Robert's rules and whether they keep Robert's rules or not. All of these different things that are unique to your church's business meetings. They have a particular way that they do the Lord's Supper. Maybe you do it the same way, or maybe it's completely different. Or they even have a way that they order Sunday school curriculum and how many copies that they order for the folks in your church. And so there's all these different particular ways that your church already does things long before you get there. And you may like some of the ways they do things, but you probably don't like some of the ways that they do things. But unfortunately, some pastors fail to acknowledge that this is a reality. They arrive at the church with a preconceived plan for how they want to lead and what they want to focus on. And this could have been something they learned about in a book. It could be something that they heard on a podcast, just like this one. Maybe it's something that was an approach they took in a previous church and it was successful. And so they feel like if it was successful in a previous church, it should work in the new church. Or it could just be a personal preference. That's just the way they like to do it. And they come in with this preconceived plan and say, hey, this is the way we're going to operate. Doesn't matter what the church has done in the past. This is what we're doing moving forward. But arriving on day one with a preconceived plan like that, in my experience, it rarely achieves the desired results, but can often lead to that unnecessary conflict that we talked about in a previous episode. I remember when I began serving in a church, we were just moving and just getting settled in to our house, and a couple of members of the church came over and very graciously helped us paint the living room before we actually got our furniture moved in. And during one of those conversations, we were just having a casual conversation, but one of the church members asked me about my plan for the church. I told him, I don't always have the right answer, but that particular day I told him, I said, listen, I don't have a plan other than to love you guys and to serve you as God would call me to do so and lead me to do so. I don't have a preconceived plan. And this church member was very thankful about that. Apparently in the past, there had been others who had that preconceived plan, and it certainly did not go over very well. You see, a better approach is to take the time that's necessary to learn well about your church. And we'll talk more about this in a later episode, but you need to learn about the church's history. As I said, Every church has a history, and you need to learn your church's history. You need to learn about the community that you're serving, that you're trying to reach with the gospel. You need to learn about how decisions are made in your church. You need to learn about the hopes and dreams and fears and frustrations that your church members have about the church's future. You need to learn why the same deacon prays over the offering every week. You need to learn the story behind that odd piece of furniture in the foyer that nobody knows why it's there and nobody knows why it's still there. You need to learn everything you can about the church during your first year. You see, learning well early in your tenure will help you to lead well later on, because you're going to be better equipped to make informed decisions. You're not just making decisions, you're making informed decisions because you've taken the time to learn about the church. By the way, as you learn about the church, as you take that time and that effort to do so, that's a loving thing to do. You're also showing that you love the church because you are taking the time to learn about them before you start to make changes, or you make decisions, or you assert your personal preferences into things. So learning well is a way that you can love well. And that in turn is a way to start well. All right, so far we've talked about 2 of the 4 priorities. Number 1, love well. Number 2, learn well. Number 3, let's talk about this one. And this one's similar to learning well, but this one is about listening well. You see, a quick way to get off to a rough start in a church is to make significant decisions without any input from anybody else in the church. That's a very quick way to get off to a very bad start. And I've known pastors who have done this many times, and they've suffered the consequences. It could be something like changing the order of the service in major ways without anybody offering their advice or their opinion on the matter. You just go ahead and make those changes. Maybe, as we talked about in the previous episode, you move some things around in the service, or you get rid of elements of the service without talking to anybody. That can lead to some serious consequences. Maybe for you spend significant amounts of church funds without talking to anybody about it. You don't take the time to learn how this process works, but you also don't take the time to talk to others to see if this is a good idea or not. Maybe for you make a long-term commitment on behalf of the church without talking to others about it. Maybe you commit the church to plant a new church, or replant a dying church, or merging with a church. Maybe you allow a group to use the facilities on an ongoing basis without talking to anybody else about church facility issues or policies, anything like that. And as you do those things, it's probably not going to go well, especially if you haven't taken the time to love well and to learn well, and you're certainly not listening well in these moments. It can lead to some unnecessary conflict and some difficult circumstances. You see, Proverbs 11:14 provides a needed reminder for us here. There it says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety." And that's just a good leadership principle. You need to listen well to others as you're making decisions for the church, as you're seeking to lead the church in different directions. You need to seek the counsel of others. And so as a pastor just getting started in a church, you need to take the time to listen well. Listen well to that still small voice of the Lord as you spend time with Him in prayer and Bible study. Obviously, you want to listen for the voice of the Lord, but you also want to listen well to other church leaders and seek their input on implementing any changes or casting vision for the church. You want to talk to others and listen for their responses, their feedback. You want to listen to other pastors of sister churches who can become trusted friends and advisors, maybe even a mentor. Maybe you want to listen to discern how the church responds to your leadership. As you begin to lead, as you begin to make some changes, listen well to find out how they respond to those changes. And finally, you want to listen to your wife and your family for any warning signs that maybe you're spending a little too much time on church matters and not enough time on family matters. Now, in a future episode, we're going to talk about specific ways to listen well in greater detail. But right now, just understand that if you want to start well in a church, you need to love well, you need to learn well, and you need to listen well. But there's one final priority that you need to focus on. And a lot of times, this is where we gravitate at the beginning, and that's to lead well. You see, if you diligently focus on loving well and learning well and listening well during the first year or two, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of time to make a lot of significant changes at the beginning. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine, because you're certainly going to gain the credibility to do so later on if you spend those early days, those early weeks and months and even year or two loving well, learning well, and listening well. Then you're going to build the relational credibility that you need to lead well later on. Now, you may just feel like you're spinning your wheels in those early days, but nothing could be further from the truth, because you're laying a solid foundation upon which you can build for years and maybe even decades to come. Because you're developing those relationships. You're earning the congregation's trust. You are building that leadership capital that you need, that you're going to spend when you need to spend it. You see, when the time comes, you will have the ability not just to lead, but to lead well. And we will certainly spend a lot of time later on talking about ways to lead well in future episodes. But right now, just understand that you are leading well by taking the time to love well, learn well, and listen well. That is leadership. And so those are the 4 pastoral foundational priorities. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's based on the collective wisdom of experienced pastors and ministry consultants who have served the Lord and His church for many years. In addition to my own experience and observation, I have greatly benefited from their wisdom and insight, and I certainly hope that you will as well. So again, to recap, if you want to start well as a new pastor or as you're beginning to serve in a new church, focus on loving well. Focus on learning well. Focus on listening well. And focus on leading well. If you'll make these your pastoral priorities, it's not going to guarantee the absence of unnecessary conflict. It's not going to guarantee that some don't follow your leadership, but it certainly will lower its chances. In later episodes, we'll talk more about each of these. In fact, the next 4 episodes, we'll spend a whole episode on each of these, so I hope that you'll come back for those. But that's it for this episode. I hope that it was helpful to you. And just to make sure that you don't miss an episode in the future, make sure that you click the subscribe button on your podcasting app of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts or something else, whatever you're listening to this on, go ahead and click that subscribe button. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you found this episode helpful, we would certainly appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating and review, because that helps other pastors find this podcast. So that's it. Until next time, may you shepherd the flock of God among you well. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Starting Well podcast. For more resources, please visit us online at startingwell.net. For more information about the Kentucky Baptist Convention, go to kybaptist.org.